Well, it's the first day of the G7 summit in Japan. World leaders visited a Shinto shrine before getting down to business. On the agenda, the global economy, China's influence both financially and militarily, as well as how to deal with extremist groups like Daesh and Boko Haram. The fallout from the refugee crisis in Europe is also likely to be discussed. Well, Mayu Yoshida is at the summit now. So, Mayu, I gather the leaders are now having a working lunch. What else has been happening?
Hi there, Kamali. Well, the G7 Ise-shima summit finally kicked off, and the leaders are actually talking about the top priority agenda as we speak. And today we're joined by Dr. John Kirton, director of the G7 Research Group, to give us an insight. So thank you very much for your time. Now, can you give us a brief explanation of what you do here?
The G7 Research Group is a global network of scholars, students, professionals, whose mission is to serve as the world's leading independent source of information and analysis about the G7. We've been to every summit since 1988, so we're here again to help the world understand what's really going on.
Okay, so let's talk about the world economy, which is perceived as the top priority agenda. What are the factors that made host Japan raise this issue, first of all, as the priority agenda?
Japanese economy has been stagnant for about 2 decades, so Prime Minister Abe, as host, wants coordinated fiscal policy stimulus, more spending to help boost the Japanese government, justify his own spending to lift Japan and its partners out of the slow growth economy they're in. But it's going to be tough to get that because Germany, the United Kingdom, they still think balanced budgets is what we need, given the high levels of deficit and debts in almost all G7 economies, above all the Japanese one.
Okay, so you've been covering the G7 summit since 1988, that's correct?
Yes.
So what do you think have changed over the past 2 decades or so in terms of the agenda, overall summit? Can you give us an insight of that?
You know, in the old days, the summits were 3 days for leaders to get together and deal with all the big problems. Now they're down to less than a day. Some spend longer flying here than they do working here.
What about you?
No, we've been here for longer.
Okay.
But the agenda is bigger, broader. You know, it's only recently that they took up issues of women's equality, gender equality, how to make it work, not just for women, but as a source of economic growth, climate change, a very big issue here, and then, of course, the security issues, the South China Sea, the East China Sea, and still, war in the Middle East, Syria and Iraq, and all the refugees from that. So those issues weren't there, the refugee ones.
What were the issues back then?
Well, back then, in 1988, it was how do we finally win the Cold War? And of course, we saw the collapse of the Soviet Union. But then how do we win the Cold War peace? Okay. By reviving a defeated Russia and bringing it in to make the G7 the G8. And the G7 did a pretty good job until 2014 when Vladimir Putin of Russia decided to go the other way. Aggression against Ukraine, annexation of the Crimean region, so that'll be an issue here. Okay,
so last but not least, let's talk about women. A lot of focus will be on women. What are the responsibilities of the G7 nations to achieve higher education among girls and higher women empowerment?
To do what these leaders promised just last November at the G20 summit in Antalya, Turkey, to lift the participation of women in the workforce by 25% by 2025. But more than that, to have them rise to management positions, to have them equally participate in the jobs of the future and the education that lies behind. Science, technology, environment, engineering, mathematics, but also to do it so they can have the kind of family life they want, including raising kids, which we badly need for the aging societies of Japan, Germany, others too.
Right, so raising kids is actually a very big issue here in Japan. All right, that's it from Iseshima in Japan. Back over to you.
Well, May, thank you very much for now.